Hey everybody. There was some comments in my most recent little practice composition I'd put up on YouTube where people had asked to about some stuff in my template, and it's been a while, I think, since I've done a template walkthrough. In fact, I may never have done one. I may have been promising one for so long. I think I've done it and just never have. So this will be, I guess, my updated late 2022 walkthrough. So I've got maybe half an hour while no one's home here to do a quick recording of this. So let's go ahead and get started. So my standard template in Logic looks like this when I start. At the very top of it are some utility tracks. For example, way back in the Logic 9 days, somebody told me, or I read in a guide, or I can't remember where I heard this, that it's really good to have a track with no inputs and outputs and no plugins and nothing on it at all, because when you do playback, it will use less system resources. Don't really know if that's actually true. I've never tested it, but it's a sort of a superstition for me. So I always include one of those at the very top, just as like I select it. Like whenever I'm bouncing, I always have this track selected. I hate like audio artifacts like pops and clicks and stuff when I'm trying to work. So anything that I can do, even if it's just maybe psychological to avoid that, I do. So yeah, at the very top is the playback track. All of my patches I keep unloaded until I want to use them. I basically use this as a configuration so that I don't have to go pick out a violin patch that I want to use. It's already configured in here. It's just not loaded. So again, that's just because I hate having pops and clicks and, playback mess ups and things like that in my, while I'm working. So, I just keep anything that I'm not using unloaded. Underneath the playback is a custom click track. I actually don't think this is working right now. I had it set so that I could record custom clicks. I do a lot of writing in asymmetrical time signatures, like 5 or 7. And those can be, like 5, for example, can be 2 plus 3 or 3 plus 2. And the click in Logic doesn't always follow that. And I know you can go in and mess with that per measure. I would rather just record it myself. It's faster. So that's what that's for. I then have below that a sketch track, which I'm not going to click on. The sketch track is just like a Cinepiano patch, I think, that goes straight out the main out. No plugins, no nothing. It's just real quick if I want to write down an idea, figure out a structure in the overall thing, etc. So those are like 3 little utility tracks. I just keep at the very top. They don't go anywhere. They don't really do much. They're just there to sort of, perform a few little functions. Recently, I've taken to just starting everything at measure 5 because of the way that Vienna Ensemble Pro seems to really enjoy having a bunch of empty space before you actually start any MIDI once you start playback. So that's why this is set by default at 5 when I come in. I start the clock in Logic at measure 5 at 0, real 1 0. So yeah, that's why I've done that. I've recently switched. I used to never do that. I actually really don't like doing that. It drives me insane, but you got to work with the technical limitations that you have. So that seems to be best practices in the industry that I have recently adopted. So it's important to note that I work on 3 monitors while I am working, and what you're seeing here is just one of them. I actually have 2 side by side and then one above it. That's for like if I'm doing picture or something. Right now I've got OBS up there so I can monitor my voice levels and see if I'm peaking. Nope, not peaking yet. On the secondary one to the right, to the side, that's kind of underneath the camera that's recording me right now is like I keep the score window or the piano roll open over there just so I can quickly look. I prefer it to be the score, but the Logic score editor is so bad that sometimes I switch it. Beneath that, I have all my instruments just in as close to what I can make a proper orchestral order as possible. So, for example, we start with the winds because those are typically on the top of a written score. At the top of each section, I have any ensemble patches. So, if you've got, for example, yeah, like here's Abbey Road winds. And as you can see, it's not loaded, and so it's loading this on another server that I keep in the basement, and it's going to stream the audio back to me over the network when I play it in. So, you know. So that's where ensemble patches go, and that's kind of the general, you know, workflow as I'm choosing instruments. So piccolos and flutes and all those things are typically at the top, so I've got all those loaded in. What happens is as I collect samples, I just add them to this template. I can, again, this is more of like a configuration. Each of these tracks less than an actually loaded patch. So, you know, say we've got like Spitfire Symphony Orchestra, you know, the piccolo version, I can click on that and, you know, it's ready to go. Sorry, that's probably coming through twice. I apologize. I wasn't actually planning on using the mic today, so it may be coming through both the mic and the little virtual mic I've got. So yeah, I just keep each instrument in a folder, and that folder contains all the patches and all the versions of that instrument that I have. So, and they're usually in a similar order. I can't say they're perfectly in order, but usually, you know, for example, we'll have Opus at the top, the new East-West player, and then although these are the same patches, this will then load this one that says like HW stands for like Hollywood Winds. That'll actually load that in the older play version, because sometimes I like to use the play version. Orchestral tools, BBCSO, SSO, then it moves down to flutes, you know, all the various things that you would see. And then of course below those, any sort of extra stuff that you might not see in a standard orchestral arrangement, but it's nice to have at the ready in case you want to use it, like a Baroque flute from Cinesamples, or an alto flute or a bass flute, all that stuff. And they're in, like I said, I try to keep them in something close to orchestral order. So we got the flutes, the oboes, and English horns, including my favorite Beautiful Goose from Cinesamples. I think this may be my favorite English horn ever sampled. It's just so nice. It's the most beautiful goose. Really, I should change the track name, but and I've used that so often, I just put it in everything because it's just so good. Yeah, I mean, again, nothing crazy. Standard orchestral instruments, clarinets, you know, bassoons, contrabassoons, etc. So what happens inside the template is that each one of these instruments, so let's, like, for example, open that up again. Each one of these instruments is set to an instrument-specific reverb, because I typically use East-West's spaces, and they have nice impulses that are set per either instrument or section. So, for example, all of these have this bus, and it's set to the spaces like Hollywood Hall Winds preset or something like that. I have that hidden. You can't see that track right now. If I unhide, you can see that down here there's one called Rev SoCal Winds, and that's just the channel strip that holds spaces and then sends it out to that bus, and then I can configure it on each instrument specifically. The only ones that don't get it are the Spitfire ones, because air, like, why wouldn't you just use the stuff that's built in to that beautiful library? So those don't typically get this. And again, it's a very small amount. Usually, I don't usually. You can see maybe half of a thing here. I kind of have this set, and then per piece I go in and mess with it. So, you know, the way it's set now is not necessarily the way it's set for everything, but that's the way I have those set up. And then each of those, every time you get like a family, an instrument family, like the winds here, they go out a special bus so that I can print the whole wind stem separately and and just print that out and record it down here, which is something that I like to do. I know you can do this much more automatically. I've found that for my workflow, just having, these buses set up, and then I go down and just record this whole folder of stems, and then, it prints the stems for me, and then there's a folder with them all named. What I called the tracks is a little bit easier for me. I don't love, for some reason, the Logic auto naming when you do stems just always drives me nuts. So this just allows me to do it easily and do it quickly, and I can hear if there's a problem right away, right? Like I just hit record and listen to it while it prints the stems. If there's any pops or clicks or weirdness that happens, I know right away. I don't have to go check every single stem that I outputted. So that's how that works. Standard orchestral order, we go to brass, we've got ensembles on the top, we've got, all the libraries just kind of in order. I do try to keep things like Berlin brass that has a horn 1, 2, 3, and 4 patch. I'll put in all of them because I think that's one of my favorite features of that library, that it has 4 horns recorded separately. That's really nice. You can do really nice things with 4 legato horns. But then, I've got everything else kind of in here. The brass is a little strange because you sort of have sub-ensembles that often happen. What I've tried to do is keep brass ensembles as their own separate thing, and then within each instrument, if I need an A6 patch for horns, they're in here. This folder's a bit of a mess right now. I should probably go through and organize a little bit, but at this point, I'm so used to this order that I think I'm probably just going to leave it in this kind of crazy order. I think the most notable thing in here is just Junkie XL brass, or I think they call it Tom Holkenberg brass now, from Orchestral Tools, is just one of my favorite libraries. Their Super Fortissimo level is absolutely just second to none. I'm just going to give it a little bit. The one downside of that library is that it runs exclusively in Sign Player. And I have found that Sign Player and Vienna do not always work together that well, so I'm just going to make sure that this patch is fully loaded before I try to do anything. All right, it's loading up down there. Okay. It's just a beautiful library. I mean, it's got nice... The softs are, I would say, maybe not something to write home about. But those forte, the really top, the really high end is just so nice. It's such a nice combination of that very growly, brassy sound, but it's still elegant. It's not ugly. It's never harsh. It's beautiful. I mean, when you get their A12 patch up to that volume, it's quite a thing to hear. Just gonna play a little bit of it. Sometimes I wonder what Mahler would have done if he had had access to this kind of stuff. We probably have 24 horn patches. So anyway, that's kind of the most notable thing here. So these all run on servers, as I've mentioned. I have another video up on the channel where I explain how I've got that configured. I've got old servers that I bought off eBay for much less than what it would normally cost to have a machine with, say, 196 gig of RAM in it. In my basement, I got 3 of them. And so depending on what library manufacturer they come from, one of them has, all the Spitfire stuff is on one, all the OT stuff is on one, all the Cine sample stuff is on one, et cetera, et cetera. Some people do it by like instruments. I found that just keeping it by manufacturer, it seems to work for me. One of them I actually have currently set up as a virtual server, so it's actually running the samples in a virtual machine, which has so far been not perfect. It's not quite there. The latency requirements for this are quite stringent, so it's easy for a VM to fall behind. But I was trying to do that to see, how it's such a nightmare to back up, you know, almost a terabyte or 4 terabytes of samples, right? Like having them as a virtual machine, you just snapshot it, throw it onto a giant, JBOD somewhere and call it a day. So that's what I was trying to do. So far, it's mixed results. So I will report back as I continue to experiment with that. But going down from the brass, the way I've done percussion is, again, by instrument, all the timpani are just right here, ready to go. And then per library and per instrument, we've got other folders of toms and, taikos. These SoundPaint taikos that they just recently came out. The SoundPaint ones actually run locally here. Are absolutely magnificent. These are some of the best ones. But yeah, these are really good. SoundPaint is really good for percussion because they've done so much technology investment in the morphing, in the taking one sample and being able to use it. For example, you can go into SoundPaint, you can sample like less than an octave of piano, and then it can actually make it sound like a full piano, and it's pretty realistic. You have to get really, really far out of the original sample's pitch in order to before it starts to sound weird and sampley. That's not what they do for these. I know they actually sample them properly, but I mean, you can sit there just, and it's doing morphing on the dynamic layers too, so you get automatically just 127 dynamic layers with everything in SoundPaint, which is pretty cool. I'm really looking forward to them branching out. They've been doing a lot of synthy stuff and kind of poppy stuff. I'm hoping they'll do some more orchestral stuff with that, because I think if they can get that working, that would be really cool. So, yeah, I've got everything just loaded up, and what I do is I find up the, like what's the taiko patch I like the most. That'll be my default, and then from here I can then go into Vienna and, make changes to it if I want to use a different taiko sample or whatever. But it's all configured for me, by me earlier, so that I can not have to, fiddle around and mess with loading and configuring stuff. The one big thing in percussion I think that's different is I do keep all the tonal percussion in its own folder just because it's like that. So having all those out in the percussion would make this just a giant template of percussion. So I keep the tonal stuff in its own folder. Much like the other ensembles, all of the non-tonal percussion out of stem, all the tonal percussion out of stem, all the keys out of stem, out their own stem. I've got them, here, any piano keys, organ. This is what I usually do here if I'm doing like a synth keyboard of some kind, like a suitcase or whatever. I'll just copy one of these tracks, change it to whatever synth I'm using, and it'll go out keys too. But I don't have any loaded because I don't actually use those a whole lot. Within the synth folder, I've just got them broken out. I use these little empty spacer guys to just keep within a folder, keep things pretty organized. I've got them broken out into pads, leads, pulses, basses, perk and effects for synths. But I do keep them in their own sort of like instrument folder, like the synthesizer instrument. And all of these go out their own stems too. So, when I print, there will be a print for, the pads and the leads and the pulses separately. As I found that's what, when people want your stems, or when I go back and mess with my stems, it's nice to have those broken out. I have these weird folders right here called Synth Winds and Synth Brass. These are mostly stuff from Heaviosity and Output, who do these like hybrid libraries where they'll take a sample of like a clarinet or something, and they'll put it into like a synth engine and sort of use it as the basis of a synth instrument. Something like this. You can hear this real, hey, look, the New World soundtrack. I think they use that exact patch. What is that? That's funny. I've been playing a little bit of that Amazon MMO New World, and that's like literally the... It's a really good score. Yeah, anyway. So yeah, they do these sort of hybrid things. So that's why we've got this like sort of synth wind, synth wrath section here. I wasn't sure where to put them because they're not really synths, but they're also not really instruments. And I want them going out their own stem usually. So these are stemmed separately and they've got their own folders. Harps, all in their folder, pretty easy. Just whatever I have sitting around, I put in here. Choir and voice obviously have their own stem. How I've configured this is, a lot of libraries will come just as like one giant sort of ensemble patch, but there are some that will break out, your SATB, like Eric Whitaker choirs, for instance, which I have in here separately. So that's kind of a jumble. Doesn't quite follow the pattern of the other ones, but people always ask me, what choir was that? What choir was that on stuff? And it's almost always, when I get that question, it's always this Albion Solstice library. It's a really great library for a lot of stuff. It's really easy to overuse. I probably overuse it. It's either that or it's Eric Whitaker Choir, which is the other one that I am a big fan of. I really like to be able to write SATB. Split. I like having stuff split out. Ensemble patches, I find it's not that I think there's anything wrong with writing an ensemble patches. Plenty of great composers use them. I myself find that I write less interesting stuff when I do it. So I have split all my stuff out. Then we've got guitars, and anything that's guitar-y just kind of goes in here. Nothing exciting there. Just like with the other families, we've got strings broken out into ensemble patches and then per instrument ones. So all violin one is all, in its own little folder for the violin instrument. And typically, I try to use the library the way the manufacturer sort of default intends it. So, for example, like SSO, when you just load up like the usual regular normal violin patch, they've got it set up as more of like a violin ensemble patch. You can play chords in it, which is actually really nice to have. But I also like to have legato patches set up. So for some other stuff, I'll have it set up, in by articulation. A lot of people like to have their shorts going out a separate stem from their longs. I currently don't have that set as I personally... I find that that's a little much for me in my productions, but I'm sure those people listen to stuff that I produce and go, man, those shorts have way too much reverb and the longs don't have enough. So that's fine. I mean, just your mileage may vary. So yeah, each violin is set, violin 1, violin 2. A notable thing in here. So some libraries will only come with a violin 1 patch. A good example of this is performance samples. They usually don't sample a separate violin 2 section. So what I do for those is I'll put it in here. And what I will do is I'll do the transposition trick where what I do is I use one of these transposition guys and I transpose, allergies today. I transpose the MIDI up 2 semitones, and then inside the actual plugin, which I don't think I can put on the screen. Yeah, inside the actual plugin, I've got it then transposed by tone, right? The actual sound by 2 semitones back, so that you get different samples. So, I can select, say, this PS Vista violin 2 and this PS Vista. Let's just put this guy on, and the PS Vista violin 1, which we're going to need to load, so that I can have them playing in unison, and it doesn't phase. because they're playing different samples. So that's a fun little trick. I see it on VI Control a lot, where people talk about the transposition trick, and there's always like 4 people that are like, what is that? This is what it is. You're sending, like, if I play a C major chord, sorry, right, the violin 1 is playing C, E, G, but the actual MIDI for the violin 2 that's going to the plugin is D, F sharp, A, right? It's 2 semitones up. And then inside that plugin, then it's being pitch bent back down so that it's the same notes and you can write them and play them as if they are 2 separate instruments. But they are, but it's triggering different samples so that you don't get phasing. It's a nice way to make your own violin 2 section. Again, standard orchestral order, violin 1, 2, viola, cello, basses, all normal. Below that, I have what I call the non-traditional strings folder. This is sort of the string equivalent of the synth brass and winds folders that you saw earlier. This is any sort of ensemble that's strange or that's relying on like a synth engine to work. So for example, I've got like Hans Zimmer strings in here because, you know, you're never going to use 60 cellos, right, in real life. It's just not a thing that happens. It's useful to have a sampled 60 cellos sitting around in here to, you know, fill out a mix or whatever you want to do. And those are all in here. You know, the Heaviosity Novo stuff is in here, you know, where they take string samples and they put them through arpeggiators and all sorts of different things. Those are in here. I also have in here the most notable one in here, I think, is Sospiro, which is this beautiful library from I need to look up who it's from. I want to make sure I give them props for the 5 people that are going to watch this video. I don't remember who it is. Anyway, Sospiro, look it up. They have just the most beautiful library. That's the swells. Why are we getting... Just gorgeous sound. One of my favorite libraries. It's so great to, you know, obviously when you're writing for samples, you're not writing for orchestra. I try to keep it as close to writing for orchestra as possible so that I don't end up with really weird, unrealistic things happening. But, you know, this is a good example of, like, you can write a whole set of string parts and then go fill out the chords down here on this library, and it's amazing how it just takes the sound and makes it feel bigger and feel more alive. This is one of my favorite uses of this library, so highly recommended. You know, I've got Slate Nash's landforms down here. You know, that's where they've got all these cool pre-recorded loops that they've put through their cycles engine. You know, stuff like that. That all goes in this non-traditional strings folder, which is, of course, its own stem. And yeah, so each one follows that same template as before, where they have an instrument-specific reverb that's just put onto a bus for all of them. Those then all go out into this thing called family buses so that I can see, you know, the winds, the brass, the orchestral, you know, tonal, the orchestral non-tonal, the keys, etc. Out here. And then if, you know, if for some reason I wanted to put a plugin on a full family, I could. I don't do it a lot. Occasionally I'll put this Gullfoss plugin on them. It works really well in percussion, I've noticed, to put that on a little bit on the stem and on the thing. And then, of course, it goes out a full mix bus where we can put anything on top of that. Typically what I'll do is, so in addition to, you know, instrument-specific reverbs and stuff that are on each family, I then will usually send it out one more full reverb to glue it all together, which I will then turn considerably down from what you're seeing here. But just to pull it all together. Yeah, some other stuff I have on there. I will occasionally use Seventh Heaven. I'm not great at using Seventh Heaven. It's an amazing plugin, but I'm not personally versed enough in the production side of music to really get the most out of that. So I usually slap spaces on it and call it a day. But it's there if I want it. This Soothe plugin is a really cool plugin. It does some dynamic EQ for you as it's playing through. It's trying to, you know, avoid places where there's a lot of, you know, harmonic buildup in certain parts. I try not to use that too much, but because it can be an easy like, oh, I'll just put Soothe on it. But it's really a great plugin for just if you're running into some parts where everything's kind of building up because maybe you're like me and you often orchestrate your low strings and brass too closely. This can really help you out and save your terrible orchestration. Goldfoss, yeah, just this is a nice little bit of what this does is it tries to you can look it up on their website. It's from a company called what is this company called? This company is called Sound Theory. Goldfoss. It's using science around the way that the human ear works to sort of perform again a little bit of dynamic EQ. It kind of tends to pop the highs, but it is never not terribly harsh. Typically, I will keep it 10% and below. I will not put a ton of this on. If I want to do any like mastering, there's ozone here. And then the last thing I put everything through on everything I ever do is an Oxford inflator. It's just a nice way to, it's a beautiful plugin. Again, it works through magic that I just don't understand. I try not to abuse it too much, but I mean, you can hear it on it doesn't just make things louder, it makes them feel inflated. So you can look that up as to how that works. Again, I am trained as a person, like I'm trained to write notes on paper that will hopefully sound good. So the whole production side of things is something that I've had to self-teach. It's something I've had to learn on my own. I've never taken any classes on it or anything. So I've just sort of tried to pick it up over time. And so I'm sure I do lots of things that are maybe not best practice. And there's a lot of things where I have a plugin like that where it's like, this is magic. I don't understand. It's great. So that's me. The very last thing I do is right before I go out stereo out, I have just this little plugin that's just sit here to keep. This is like a ear, and save your ears sort of thing. I was having some problems. Sorry, the speakers. I was having some problems a while back with there was a synth that just kept outputting just incredibly loud white noise, just randomly, or just blast you, which was obviously not something that I was going to allow to continue. I really wanted to use the plugin, so this is just here in case something like that happens or there's some sort of weird audio thing. It just, if it goes above plus 15, it just clamps it down. It adds a tiny bit of latency because it's trying to smash that down right before it happens, so it never even comes out the speakers. So that's one more thing. So yeah, and that's how I have the template set up. Nothing crazy. It's just it's a lot of instruments, but that's what makes it complicated. There's nothing. I'm not doing any sort of deep logic magic on it. When you open up something like the Spitfire Audio BBC template, which I do actually have here. One of the things you look at it and you're just like, oh my gosh, what are they doing here? They're doing all sorts of routing magic and they're moving stems to different places and they've got buses going to stems going to. It's very complicated. I try to keep that side of things as simple as possible. What I want at the end of the day is I want to be able to go to my prints folder. I want to be able to hit record on this prints folder, record everything, get a nice full mix that's exactly what I heard, and get all of my stems in per family. So, depending on the client, I might do the stems individually, depending on what they want. Right, like for Halo, I gave them everything as separated as I could possibly get it. Separating out the reverbs onto their own stuff as much as possible, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's kind of my guiding principle, is to try to keep it simple, stupid, as much as possible. But obviously, once you get down to the 600s tracks, things are not as simple anymore. But yeah, that's my template walkthrough. That's kind of the overall sort of structure and how everything is set up. Hopefully now, when I'm trying to answer questions on YouTube and people are like, what samples are those? Sometimes it takes me some time to look it all up because, I will often, mix libraries. I will often, sometimes what you hear is maybe like a violin section is actually three violin sections. One of the things I like to do sometimes is take a close mic from, SSO, or actually I wouldn't take it that from SSO. I'd take the wides, but take one mic from a different library, and you can kind of, if you can get them to glue together, which is really hard, it doesn't always work, but if you can get them to glue together, you have a very unique violin sound there. That's a kind of a combination of different libraries, and it doesn't sound a lot like a library you've heard before. I used to just use exclusively East-West instruments, and those are great instruments. This is not a knock on them by any means, but it got to the point where I could hear string parts, even like separated string parts, and I could be like, yeah, that's East-West. That's from Hollywood. And I started to need to have a little bit more choices in what I do. So I will go in often, and I will intentionally try to pick libraries that I haven't used in a while, both so that I keep them in my mind about how they work and how to get the best results, but also to try to keep keep the combos as fresh as possible, so that the ultimate product is something different. So yeah, that's it. That's my whole template. So hopefully that's been helpful to you. Before we go, I'd just like to stress that like the way I've done it is not necessarily the way. I'm sure a lot of professionals would watch this and probably cringe at some of the stuff I'm doing, and that's fine. This is just the workflow that works for me. So if you have a different way of setting it up and that works for you, I encourage you to use it. Do what works for you, but hopefully maybe there's a trick or two in here that you found useful. So yeah, if you want to leave any questions in the comments, that helps me out in terms of getting more people to see my stuff here on YouTube, which is helpful for getting people to listen to my stuff on Spotify and Apple Music and all that stuff, which is where I actually make my living, or at least my consistent living. So if you could do all those things that everyone on YouTube is always asking you to do, buttons, likes, subscriptions, comments, I mean, please start up a fight in the comments about how terrible it is that how I do my reverbs or bussing or something, so that we can get a really big controversy going and get a lot of that engagement, right? All right. Thanks, everybody, and I'll be posting in the future. Thanks for stopping by.